Just want to bring you a different breaking story. Sky News understands the International Olympic Committee is moving towards a blanket ban on transgender women from women's sport.
For years, they called us conspiracy theorists. They said we were overreacting. They claimed we were on the wrong side of history. But today, my friends, the truth has finally broken through. The International Olympic Committee is set to ban all transgender athletes from competing in the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. This is the vindication millions of Americans have been waiting for, and it's sending shockwaves through the entire sports world. What you're about to hear isn't just another culture war story. This is about the fundamental integrity of sports, the protection of women's rights, and the triumph of biological reality over radical ideology. The elites who push this agenda never wanted you to see this day coming, but here we are. And let me tell you, what's happening behind the scenes at the Olympic Committee is even more explosive than what's being reported. Sources close to the decision have revealed that the scientific evidence was so overwhelming that even the most progressive members couldn't ignore it any longer. So why should you care about this Olympic ban? Because this isn't just about sports. This is about whether we as a society will continue to be forced to deny reality in service of a radical ideology, or whether we'll finally return to the common sense that built Western civilization. When billions of dollars, international prestige, and the fundamental rights of female athletes collide with political correctness, something has to give, and for once, truth is winning. This isn't just a policy change. It's a seismic shift in our cultural landscape. For over a decade, we've been told to ignore what we can plainly see with our own eyes. We've been forced to pretend that biological differences don't matter. We've watched as female athletes who dedicated their lives to their sport were pushed aside to accommodate biological males. But not anymore. The tide is turning, and you're witnessing history in the making. Let's back up and understand how we got here. For years, international sports organizations have bent over backward to accommodate transgender athletes, particularly biological males competing in women's categories. Under previous Olympic rules, each sport could decide if transgender women, biological males, could compete against women if their testosterone levels fell below a certain threshold. This approach completely ignored the scientific reality that biological males retain significant physical advantages, even after hormone therapy. The establishment media would have you believe this is a new issue, but the truth is that common-sense Americans have been raising red flags about this for over a decade. Remember back in 2015, when Bruce Jenner, now known as Caitlyn Jenner, was celebrated with the Arthur Ashe Courage Award at the ESPYS. That moment marked a turning point when questioning any aspect of transgender ideology became taboo in mainstream discourse, especially in sports. What followed was a systematic attempt to silence anyone who dared suggest that biological differences between men and women matter in athletic competition. Scientists who published research showing male physical advantages were attacked professionally. Female athletes who spoke up were branded as bigots. Coaches and sports administrators who expressed concerns were forced into sensitivity training or pushed out of their positions entirely. Meanwhile, high school girls across America started losing championships, scholarships, and opportunities to biological males. Remember the case in Connecticut, where two transgender athletes, biological males, won 15 women's state championship titles that were previously held by 9 different girls? Those female athletes filed a lawsuit, arguing that allowing transgender athletes to compete in girls' sports violated Title I's protections. They were viciously attacked in the media and on social media for simply wanting fair competition. The most infamous example at the Olympic level was Laurel Hubbard, who competed in women's weightlifting at the 2021 Tokyo Olympics after transitioning in 2012. Hubbard was already 35 years old when transitioning, after developing all the natural physical advantages that come with male puberty: greater bone density, increased lung capacity, different skeletal structure, and larger hearts. These advantages don't disappear with hormone therapy, and deep down, everyone knows it. Let's be crystal clear about what we're talking about here. Male puberty creates advantages that are impossible to erase. Men have approximately 40% more upper body strength than women. The average man has a VO2 max, a measure of aerobic capacity, approximately 50% higher than the average woman. Men have larger hearts, greater lung capacity, different skeletal structures, and faster reaction times. These aren't social constructs. They're biological realities shaped by millions of years of evolution and encoded in our DNA. Consider this. In the 100-meter dash, The qualifying time for the men's Olympic trials is so fast that not a single female runner in history, not one, has ever run fast enough to qualify. That's not because women aren't trying hard enough or because of societal barriers. It's because of biology. And here's something the media rarely mentions. More than 800 male athletes at the high school level have run times that would break the current women's world record in the 400-meter dash. Let that sink in. 800 high school boys are faster than the fastest woman who has ever lived. This is the reality of the physical differences we're talking about. But the tide began to turn when more female athletes started speaking out. Women who had trained their entire lives for Olympic glory watched as biological advantages that no amount of training could overcome threatened to erase their dreams. These brave women risked cancellation, sponsorship losses, and their careers to stand up for the basic truth that men and women are biologically different. And the scientific community, at least those not intimidated into silence, continued to provide evidence that could no longer be ignored. Study after study confirmed what anyone with eyes could see. Biological males retain significant physical advantages, even after years of hormone therapy. A groundbreaking study published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine found that even after 2 years of hormone therapy, transgender women still maintained a 12% advantage in running tests. Another study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism showed that transgender women maintained bone density advantages over biological females even after long-term hormone treatment. The evidence kept piling up until it became impossible to ignore. What's particularly significant about these studies is that they were conducted by researchers who had no political axe to grind. Many of them began their research expecting to find that hormone therapy would level the playing field. The data led them to the opposite conclusion. Biology matters, and it cannot be erased by ideology or medication. The situation reached a breaking point at the 2024 Paris Olympics when several controversial incidents forced the IOC to confront reality. Multiple women's events were dominated by transgender athletes who had only recently transitioned, leaving lifelong female athletes on the sidelines. The public backlash was immediate and intense. Even moderate voices began questioning the fairness of the competition. One particularly heartbreaking moment came in the women's swimming events, where a biological male who had transitioned just 3 years earlier shattered a world record that had stood for over a decade. The cameras caught the second-place finisher, a woman who had trained since she was 6 years old, fighting back tears during the medal ceremony. That image went viral and became a turning point in the public perception of this issue. What made this different from previous controversies was the reaction from other athletes. Instead of staying silent out of fear, dozens of female Olympians began speaking out. They organized press conferences, wrote open letters, and used their social media platforms to demand change. Their message was clear. This wasn't about politics or ideology. It was about the basic fairness that is the foundation of all athletic competition. It wasn't just conservative Americans raising concerns. Female athletes from across the political spectrum and around the world began forming unprecedented alliances to protect women's sports. Even traditionally left-leaning nations like Sweden and Norway started expressing doubts about the current policies. The growing list of former champions speaking out included tennis legend Martina Navratilova, Olympic swimmer Sharon Davies, and Olympic gold medal-winning decathlete Daley Thompson. These weren't fringe voices. These were some of the most respected names in international sports. When they spoke, people listened. Under new IOC President Kirsty Coventry, a former Olympic swimmer herself, the Olympic Committee finally began serious discussions about a dramatic policy shift. Sources close to Coventry report that she has expressed a firm commitment to protect the female category in Olympic competition, a statement that would have been considered controversial just a few years ago, but now represents common sense returning to sports. The proposed blanket ban would prevent scenarios like what we saw with Laurel Hubbard in Tokyo and would apply across all Olympic sports for the 2028 Los Angeles Games. While it's unlikely to come into force before the Winter Olympics in Italy next February, the direction is clear. Biological reality is making a comeback on the world stage. What's particularly interesting is the science that finally broke through the ideological barrier. Medical experts have conclusively demonstrated that even after years of hormone therapy, transgender women retain advantages in muscle mass, bone density, lung capacity, and other physiological factors that significantly impact athletic performance. Some of these advantages are so fundamental that they can't be eliminated through any amount of medical intervention. The male skeletal structure, with its wider shoulders, narrower hips, and different joint angles creates mechanical advantages in almost every sport. Larger hearts and lungs provide greater oxygen delivery to muscles. Even hand size, foot size, and reaction time differences persist after hormone therapy. Think about it. Men and women have competed in separate categories for the entire history of organized sports for a reason. Men are, on average, stronger, faster, and have greater endurance than women. This isn't controversial. It's biological reality backed by millions of years of human evolution. Let's look at the numbers. The world record for the women's 100-meter dash is 10.49 seconds, set by Florence Griffith Joyner in 1988. The men's record is 9.58 seconds, set by Usain Bolt in 2009. That difference of less than 1 second represents an enormous performance gap that no amount of training can overcome. In weightlifting, the differences are even more dramatic, with men lifting 30 to 40% more weight than women in the same weight class. In swimming, the gap is equally stark. Katie Ledecky's world record in the women's 400-meter freestyle is 3 minutes, 56.46 seconds. The men's record, held by Paul Biederman, is 3 minutes, 40.07 seconds, a difference of more than 16 seconds. That's not a small margin. It's a gulf that no amount of training can bridge. Even in sports where raw strength isn't the primary factor, biological differences matter enormously. In tennis, the fastest recorded serve by a woman is 134 miles per hour by Sabine Lisicki. The men's record is 163.7 miles per hour by Sam Groth. That nearly 30 miles per hour difference explains why most female players would struggle against even middling male professionals. These realities aren't just statistics. They represent the core of fair competition. When we ignore them, we're not being progressive, we're being dishonest. And that dishonesty hurts real people, particularly female athletes who've dedicated their lives to their sport. But here's what the mainstream media isn't telling you about this decision. The IOC didn't make this call because they suddenly had a conservative awakening. They made it because they were facing a massive revolt from female athletes around the world who were threatening to boycott future Olympic Games if the issue wasn't addressed. Several prominent Olympic champions had formed a coalition and were preparing to announce that they would not participate in the 2028 Games unless changes were made. This behind-the-scenes pressure, combined with plummeting viewership as audiences lost faith in the fairness of competition, forced the IOC's hand. Inside sources tell us that secret meetings were held in Lausanne, Switzerland, where IOC officials reviewed internal polling data showing that support for transgender athletes in women's sports had reached an all-time low. Even in progressive European countries, the majority of citizens supported separate categories based on biological sex. The writing was on the wall. Continue down this path, and the Olympics risked losing its standing as the world's premier sporting event. What's more, major sponsors were getting nervous. Internal polling showed that the majority of viewers across the political spectrum were uncomfortable with biological males competing against females, even if they wouldn't say so publicly. Money talks and the prospect of losing billions in sponsorship and broadcast rights finally cut through the ideological fog. Several major corporate sponsors had privately informed the IOC that they were reconsidering their involvement if the transgender issue wasn't addressed. These weren't small players. We're talking about companies that contribute hundreds of millions of dollars to the Olympic movement. When they speak, the IOC listens. But perhaps most significant was the behind-the-scenes role played by female athletes from countries where speaking out carried real consequences. Women from the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia made it clear through diplomatic channels that they would not continue to participate in a system that erased biological differences. This global pressure made it impossible for critics to dismiss concerns as merely Western or conservative. Another factor that isn't being widely reported is the role of medical professionals within the Olympic movement itself. The IOC's own medical commission had been accumulating evidence for years about the physical advantages retained by transgender women. Their confidential report, which hasn't been released to the public, apparently contains data so compelling that it silenced even the most ardent ideologues within the organization. The implications of this ban go far beyond the Olympics. This decision represents a turning point in the broader cultural debate about gender ideology. For years, common-sense observations about biological reality were dismissed as bigotry. People lost jobs, social media accounts, and reputations for stating what human beings have understood since the dawn of time. Men and women are biologically different. The intimidation tactics were relentless. Remember J.K. Rowling? The beloved author of Harry Potter was viciously attacked simply for suggesting that biological sex is real and matters. She was labeled a hateful bigot, received death threats, and was abandoned by actors who owed their careers to her work, all for stating what every human being understood to be true throughout history until about 15 minutes ago. Or consider the case of Maya Forstater, who lost her job at a think tank for stating that biological sex cannot be changed. It took years of legal battles before a court finally ruled that her views were protected and worthy of respect in a democratic society. The message was clear. Question gender ideology, and your livelihood, reputation, and safety could be at risk. Scientists weren't immune either. When researchers published findings showing that biological differences between males and females persist even after hormone therapy, they faced professional consequences. Some had funding pulled, others were denied opportunities for advancement. Many simply stopped pursuing research in this area altogether, creating a chilling effect on scientific inquiry. This Olympic ban signals that the pendulum is finally swinging back toward reality. When one of the most internationally respected and traditionally progressive organizations in the world acknowledges biological truth, it gives permission for others to do the same. We're already seeing ripple effects across other sports organizations and even into education policy, where schools are reconsidering policies that allow biological males in female locker rooms and on female sports teams. The NCAA, which had previously allowed transgender athlete Leah Thomas to compete in and win women's swimming events, is now under intense pressure to follow the IOC's lead. Several state athletic associations that had adopted permissive policies are now reviewing those decisions. The dominoes are starting to fall, and they're falling on the side of biological reality. Think about the courage this took. In today's climate, anyone who stands up for biological reality risks being labeled a bigot, losing their job, and being ostracized from polite society. Yet the evidence became so overwhelming and the injustice so apparent that even the Olympic Committee couldn't ignore it any longer. What's happening now is nothing short of a cultural earthquake. The foundation of gender ideology, the notion that biological sex is irrelevant and can be changed at will, is crumbling before our eyes. And it's crumbling not because of political pressure, but because reality always wins in the end. The most powerful aspect of this shift is that it's happening despite massive institutional resistance. Every major corporation, university, media outlet, and cultural institution has been pushing gender ideology for years. Hollywood celebrities lecture us about it. Tech companies censor anyone who questions it. Universities indoctrinate students with it. Yet despite all that power and influence, the tide is turning because reality is a stubborn thing.